So in the past, I've given talks, and I'll be doing Saturday on mental health, specifically like anxiety and depression, that kind of stuff. But one of the things that you run into, which happened to me at Past Summit last year, is you give a talk on your personal experiences and how you personally deal with it, and someone comes up and say, well, what if my coworker is having mental health issues? And then I go, I have no idea, go talk to Tracy, she was working on a talk on this, right? And so I think one of the things I've just kind of realized is the moment you put yourself out there and start talking about this, you open yourself up to the fact that it's, in America, we like to believe in individualism, that every woman or man for themselves, but in reality, we have coworkers, we have employees, we have communities, and so it's hard to get away from the fact that the moment you start talking about this, you have to think about the broader applications. So that's why I'm talking.
So, but just in case you didn't know who we were, by the way, I'm Tracy Bajian. I do a lot of stuff, but basically, I usually can be found trying to make a difference somewhere amongst all those icons.
Yeah. So I'm Eugene. I'm not as cool as Tracy. Oh, it's on auto? There we go. My marketing assistant made that for me. I don't have all these icons. I'm an MVP, mostly because of her, because I'm bad at paperwork. So I submit everything the day they said you were supposed to submit it, right? But because of time zones, it didn't count. And I'm like, all right, tech support, can you just fix that? And they're like, no, you have to have her resubmit for you, reapply. And then 3 months later, you can try again, right? And so I come back to Tracy, I'm like, Tracy, I'm bad at things. So I have the whole MVP thing going for me. I do a lot of training and presenting and that kind of stuff, but I don't have nearly as many icons as
But he has
does.
a rocket ship, just saying.
Really, I'm winning.
All I have is a cape.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about? Again, we're we're trying to fit 2 hours of content into 50 minutes, but why is it? Am I hitting the button too easily? I don't know. It's cursed, so we'll see. But anyway, so first we want to talk about prevention, right? The idea is, what can we do at the very beginning? Hold on. Does someone else have a clicker? Are you cursing my stuff? We're going to do the Windows thing, turn it off, back on.
Somebody's messing with us.
Right? It's haunted. Trying to get into Wales was haunted.
I mean, we have enough
I had
anxiety.
to buy 2 bus tickets because the train was down because of high winds, electrical line. So I couldn't make it the one stop from Heathrow to Heathrow on the way to Piccadilly. Anyway, so we're going to be talking about prevention first. Is what are the environmental things that you can do, like reducing stigma or just being aware of it, that can help mitigate these issues before they even happen, right? The second thing is, okay, well, how do I actually apply some of this stuff? Okay, there's been a mental health incident. I don't know the best word for it, but why am I cursed?
Do you want me to get my clicker out
Get
and
your
see if
clicker
it
out.
works?
I'm sorry, everyone.
Let me dig through my complicated big old bag of stuff in here.
While she's doing that, so we'll talk about, okay, what do you do when you want to bring it up? How do you form a wellness action plan? And then we're going to talk about accommodations, things you can do that are often fairly simple or cheap, and building resiliency. It's not the clicker, everything's just cursed. Hold on. Maybe you were right, we should have used your thing. I know. It's fine. I'm gonna, again, I've worked in IT long enough that I know how to turn things off and on. It wasn't so I was in the Guy in a Cube pre-con, and his had Windows updates occur mid-pre-con, so it cannot be worse than that.
You're supposed to put those on pause before
All right, we're going to try again. I don't think it's the clicker. I think it might have been something with one of the buttons. We're trying again.
Okay, because I give up. I put too much stuff in here.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Transitioning hotels.
All right, everyone get your good mojo Jojo going on.
It just wants us to think we lost our minds, that's all.
It's fine. All right. Introduction. So here's a definition of mental health from the U.S. Department of Health and Services, and there's a specific part that I want to take away from this. It is impossible to segregate mental health from how it affects you and your interactions with others, right? We want to think of it as just oftentimes emotion. You're depressed, so therefore you're sad, right? Or you're anxious or whatever. But what's important is it affects your behaviors and actions and interactions with others. It affects both how you logically think and interpret the world around you, but also your feelings. And so it's important not to, try and silo it, compartmentalize it. You are a whole, entire, holistic human being, and mental health is a part of that, okay? I can't just focus on diet and just get my one arm stronger or weaker, right? It doesn't work that way. And so when we talk about mental illness, it's these disorders that affect your mood, thinking, behavior, and sometimes they're transient, right? It may be exacerbated by stressors in your environment or your life or where you're at. It might be something that you can get therapy or pharmacology to treat or potentially even cure. Or it might be something that lasts your entire life, right? Like, hopefully Tracy won't mind me saying, she has bipolar disorder. Mood disorders are incredibly difficult to treat. Generally speaking, bipolar disorder, you're not going to cure that, you're going to treat it. I have diabetes. I am a cyborg. I have a little sensor. Turns out there's no thinking my way out of a failed pancreas. I take multiple daily injections because I have a lifelong chronic illness, right? But it can vary. And so it's important to understand that these are things that might come and go, or it might be something that requires daily treatment to deal with. And it affects your whole life. It's not just some single aspect. It's not just, oh, I'm a little mopey today. And so related to that are signs and symptoms. And again, the key takeaway I want you to get here is that there's the mental or psychic aspect, however you want to think of it, and the physical aspect, the behavioral aspect. When you look at these conditions, they manifest in a bunch of different ways. And so the mental stuff, I don't plan on reading all of this, but it can be mood changes. It can be how you respond to people, how you avoid people. And one of the things that's particularly frustrating if you're not familiar with mental health issues is sometimes the symptoms are contradictory in how they manifest in people. And so what do I mean? If you have depression, you might sleep in all day, or you might have insomnia, right? Or if you have bipolar, that used to be called manic depressive disorder because you would go on this roller coaster of being depressed or being hyperactive, right? And so sometimes these symptoms can be very confusing when looked at in isolation, right? But they show up both in these like mental or emotional kind of ways, but they also can show up in physical or behavioral kind of things. So if you come to my talk on Saturday, I'll show the depression inventory, where it's basically a 25-point questionnaire to determine if you're dealing with depression. And there's a section of those on physical things. How's your health? How's your sleep? How's your energy? Because, again, you can't just like cut off the brain stem and treat yourself as a brain in a vat somewhere. You run into these psychosomatic manifestations of having a mental illness. And so you want to be alert for both what you might commonly think of when you think of mental health, but also physical or behavioral kind of implications. And so there's a lot of things that can cause mental health challenges. Some of it's genetic. A lot of these are highly heritable, right? My mom has bipolar, and that freaked me out as a teenager because I knew there was a very high chance that I was going to inherit something, and I probably did, right? But in talking about the workplace, some of the things are stress, right? You think about a lot of this stuff is we're trying to cope with our environment, right? And there's this idea of emotional regulation and emotional deregulation or decompensation, right? Like, I'm sure we've all had that one week where everything was fine until it wasn't, right? You were on call, you were up late, you weren't sleeping well, and you had everything under control until suddenly you didn't, right? And so sometimes stressors in the environment can really, really exacerbate things in a sudden and dramatic sort of way. Or it can happen over time, right? If you work on a team that doesn't have good boundaries, doesn't have enough support or whatever, then these things can add up. We mentioned the pandemic, and one of the things I kind of realized the hard way is I have some caffeine here. And I used to treat it like any other legal drug, and I would habituate and take more and more and more, and then be like, all right, I'm quitting. And then I would cut down, and then 6 months later, I'd go back up, right? Well, during the pandemic, I never made it back down, right? So I currently, sadly, drink 3 cups of coffee a day, and I'd like to not, right? But I realized that I started feeling symptoms of burnout. It used to be that I could take an extra day for a long weekend, or I could have a working vacation, which is an oxymoron, I acknowledge, and I'd be back to normal. And this past year, that stopped working for me, right? I was feeling some of these symptoms of burnout, and it had implications on my mental health. And so I had to take more steps. I took 2 weeks off around Christmas, and that helped. But, so you can have short-term transient stressors, or you can have ones that accumulate over time. And then, unfortunately, sometimes people are the problem, right? I mean, I think we've all experienced jerks or unkind people in a relationship, and I'm sure there's plenty of us who have unfortunately dealt with actual harassment and bullying. Me personally, I'm a pretty privileged individual. Like, no one, as far as I'm aware, no one's ever sexually harassed me. If they did, they didn't do a good job because I wasn't aware of it. But I did have one coworker who was not particularly, I hired him at my last job, and it was a mistake because he just wasn't up to the job. And then eventually, my team got moved under a different team, and suddenly we were coworkers, we were peers. And as the pressure of the job mounted, there was more passive aggressiveness and stuff, until at the very end of it, I had left that job, I started working for myself, and at one point, I get this bizarre string of like abusive text messages, right? And it was just like, out of nowhere, I was like, maybe he's drunk? I don't know what's going on. And then 2 years later, he's like, hey, what's up? As if nothing had happened. And he's like, I was having a mental health issue. I'm seeking help. I'm like, I'm really happy for you. I wish you the best. I'm not going to respond anymore. And he's like, oh, by the way, I had a stroke. And I'm like, what? So everybody in some capacity, I've been blessed that bullying and harassment generally hasn't been something I've dealt with other than like high school.
So lucky. He's so lucky.
I am, truly. But the point being is that it can happen to everyone. No one is completely safe from having to deal with these issues. And the reason I bring all this stuff up, as an employee, many of these things are out of your control, right? Like, you can change jobs, you can try to push for changes, there's limits there. But as an employer, as a manager, a lot of these things are your responsibility, right? So you should not be taking full responsibility for someone else's mental health. That's not your job. You're not their mom. And if you are their mom, why are they working for you? Like, please. But you have a lot of control over the environment that they work in. You can push for changes, you can set policies, you can model behavior, and we'll talk about that, right? So just some things to think about.
All right.
Woo!
So we're going to talk about reducing stigma, because a lot of people have stigma when it comes to about mental health,
Yep.
Unlike us, because we just talk about it openly. So when it comes to stigma, it exists everywhere. When you come to any place, a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They're not open about it. It exists in every country, every society. People are just, not talked about well when they talk about their mental health. And this dates back really far in society, and you'll get to see a nice picture about
right.
that
Some
soon.
art.
Some art. But basically, 25% of people in the U.S. are diagnosed with a mental health condition in any given year. Again, it could be transient and stuff. But there's another 18% that usually go undiagnosed. So that means there's 43% of people that have a mental health issue. So that means basically half this room.
Right. You look to your left, you look to the right. One of those two people has a mental health issue. And if you're by the window, it's you. So,
and it can be as simple as just having anxiety. I mean,
yeah.
Getting nervous and to a certain extent,
when it starts to interfere with your daily functioning, it's a mental health issue.
So, this is my fun picture. So trypaning dates back to 10,000 years ago, where we used to bore holes into people's heads. And this started off as a medical thing that they did, but it evolved into Europe, sorry Europeans. But in the medieval times, then they started using this to treat what we now classify as mental health conditions, because they thought they were releasing evil spirits and things like that out of people's heads. And can you just imagine how painful this is? I mean, come on. And this has evolved into, they would lock people away into towers and things like this, and, keep people, I've heard of stories where, royalty was locked away if they thought they were not quite normal and stuff. But we started, that must be people have evil spirits, they must have, had a sin, they have a character flaw. Do you hear how that's all negative, has a negative connotation? So that makes people think there's something wrong with them, that they must be bad, they must have something wrong with them. So that makes people self-stigmatize, which that's why no one wants to talk about it if they have an issue. So that's why we've got to get rid of the stigma and get people opening up about it in the workplace and make it safe for them to want to open up to leadership and be able to let you know that they have a problem. That way you can help them.
Yeah.
So some ways to help reduce the stigma in the workplace is, one, to get your leaders some training on it. That way they're prepared to talk to the employees about it. There's some websites out there that can help you with. There's one called Time to Change in the UK. There's a link to it at the end of the resource slides, because I know people are going to ask where to get it from. And we can talk more about that, but there's definitely a link at the end. But getting that training is going to help you be able to know what to say to people. There's videos. And without that training, you're not going to know what to say, because these conversations get uncomfortable.
Yeah, they're difficult.
Make people take their PTO. I mean, there's too many people that just let their PTO ride, or they hoard it for the day that they leave the company so they can get a big payout or whatever if their company allows that. And people need time off. He was telling me some investments companies force people to take PTO.
So in the United States, I have a friend named Chris Bell who worked at like the Motley Fool. They're like a stock news company or what have you. And some of those places will have random required vacation time to make sure that you're not doing financial fraud, right? And so basically it'll be like, you hit the lottery, you have to take 2 weeks off. Now, your email's locked. And so, I think one of the things that's important with that idea is it builds resilience in the team, but people should use their vacation. Having burnt out employees that aren't taking care of themselves isn't helping you. And I'm really bad about this. I work for myself. I wish my boss would yell at me more to take time off, right? Like I went down to Florida recently to visit some family because I get seasonal affective disorder. There's no sun in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so in the wintertime, I have to go somewhere warm. Well, guess what? I was working during that time, right? If I was a better employee, I would take more vacation time.
Yeah, and when they're on their PTO, don't expect them to check their emails and fuss at them if they're actually sending emails.
Yes,
and
lock
stuff
them out
like
of their
that.
account.
Yeah, change their password or something,
Spice it up.
But tell them before you do that so they don't think they were fired.
Yeah, don't cause a mental health breakdown by...
Just saying, they might think something happened. So, and promote workplace wellness by recognizing the stress in the place and the burnout and stuff, and making sure you balance out workloads and things like that, and give them flex time and different benefits like that help balance out things in the workplace. Make sure your benefits package actually have mental health services. That's something that's become more prevalent in the U.S., but there are places still that just don't have it, where you can go to a psychiatrist, go get therapy, get mental health medications, things like that. Because if you don't have those services in place, then they can't get help if they have an issue. And promote more supportive resources like, support groups and things like that. Have resources available that if they do have issues, you've got outside resources that you can hand them that they can go to and get help. Maybe an EAP program, different things like that. That's an employee assistance program. I don't know if they have that in the
Well, I saw it spelled
Europe.
with 2 M's when I Googled it, so I think it's in the UK. That's how
Yeah.
Programmy.
Yeah, it might have different initials somewhere else, so I figured I would do that. But, have something where they have outside resources outside the company that they can go to that are free and available that they can use. There's hotlines you can call and get services and things like that where they can have someone to talk to and stuff like that. I mean, some companies will have like a one-page flyer available on their internet, on their wiki page that you can go to and that has free resources, and nobody knows that they're accessing them. So those type of things allow people to just be able to go in and do what they need to do, and you're promoting it, and your leaders know about it, and you're able to push it out to the employees so that they're able to access these resources and make it open in the workplace. Back to you, Judy.
Yeah. So how do we address this? How do we start the conversation, right? So 4 strategies. First, educate your employees. So I didn't start receiving therapy until my second job out of college. So I worked 1 year at one place, and then my last job, I worked there for like 5 or 7 years, I forget. And I was shocked. Now, I get America's kind of a hole in the ground sometimes with our healthcare, but I was shocked that therapy was covered by my health insurance program. I kid you not, because to me, the way that I had always conceived of healthcare was like my arm's broken or something like that. So the fact that I had a very small copay, it was like $20 per visit for my health insurance, and then the health insurance cover for my therapy, I didn't know that, right? I didn't know that was included in my health insurance. I didn't know that was available. And there's things that you can inform or educate your employees about just in general. The next one is, again, the thing you have the most control over is the work environment, right? You have the most leeway with that. You should not be taking responsibility for someone's emotions and inner thoughts, because not only can you not control that, but they might be fighting a battle that has nothing to do with you, right? They might be dealing with something from their childhood, from their past job. They might be dealing with family or friends issues, right? So focus on what's within your control. And as an employer or a manager, the workplace and the way it's managed is for the most part within your control. Related to that, get rid of the jerks, right? Now, easier said than done, right? But the thing is, again, I am very lucky because I am a white guy. Rarely has anyone successfully harassed me. You're all welcome to try when we go out, whatever, if you want to practice. But
if you want to hear horror stories,
yeah.
go to my website. I've got my mental health presentation there. It's full of toxic workplace horror stories that have affected my mental health.
Right. I mean, like, how much? So one of the things I really appreciate about SQL Bits is that they have these sessions, and I'm sure there's going to be like 5 different sessions on imposter syndrome, right? Well, imposter syndrome is hard enough to deal with when you're qualified and you belong there. It's so much harder to deal with when there's at least 1 or 2 coworkers that are either implicitly or explicitly giving you the message, you do not belong here. You do not deserve to be here, right? Get rid of the jerks. Like, that's a common issue in a lot of workplaces, like, oh, yeah, Bob's a little rough around the edges, but he brings in a lot of sales. I think at a certain point you risk being an enabler to someone's mental health challenges if you don't get rid of the jerks. And then provide resources, right? Again, both either stuff that's related to the workplace, like the EAP, like an assistance program, or just here's some numbers, right? So my mom would always call what's called a warm line. So it's not a suicide hotline. It's I'm having just emotional issues and I need someone to talk to, right? So there's services like that that don't cost anything that are available. So even just having a one-page flyer of like, here's some resources that are available can be really helpful. But for your employees, the strategies that you can help them with is first, identify. Many people may not realize that they have mental health issues, right? I know a couple friends that have children with ADHD, right? And it's so funny that, okay, your kid's struggling in school, you get them diagnosed, and then the doctor turns to you and says, so you realize this is like 50% heritable, right? So there's a 50% chance you have ADHD. And they go, I never thought of that, right? We find ways to cope with these things, right? It may not seem like it, but I'm an introvert, and I used to have really bad social skills. I get that I'm on stage now, but I would put my foot in my mouth regularly, and for a long time, when I would interact with other human beings, I had a bunch of rules in my head. It was a giant nested if-then statement. If the person is wearing a nice shirt or dress, say that's a nice shirt or dress, unless it's in a weird location, and then don't say anything because then you look like a creep. Like, I would have this giant nested kind of list.
With go-tos, right?
Yeah, like just whatever. Because I didn't have a lot of these skills. And so, I probably am somewhere on that spectrum of, a lot of these things don't come naturally to me, right? And maybe if I'd had some more awareness of some of this stuff earlier, I would have had better coping strategies, right? I would have known how to cope with it, and I would have had a better idea of how I can deal with it, right? So both tolerating the issues, but then also how can I mitigate them, how can I treat them, how can I persevere? So there's a bunch of different things that you can do to promote a stress-free work environment, right? A lot of these seem pretty obvious, and I'm not going to go through every one, but there's a key takeaway I want you to get. Oh, we had a slide issue. The key takeaway I want you to get is this. Most of this is good management. Most of the things that you can do to reduce stress in the workplace, to promote mental health, is stuff you should be doing regardless. It's just that you're providing an extra bit of thoughtfulness. You're having some thoughtfulness about how managing the stressfulness of the work environment has ramifications beyond just being convenient or inconvenient. That's kind of one of the important things to think about. In terms of preventing these stressors, policies. Policies are really good, right? So people, I wish I'd pull up the study, but there was an interesting study about how someone who's dealing with depression or anxiety does not do well with social ambiguity, right? So the idea is that how many of you have gotten the message from your boss, hey, can we talk? Right? I'm sure we've all gotten it, and you're like, I'm going to get fired, right? Well, unfortunately, if you don't have clear policies around a lot of this stuff, around mental health or around, again, getting rid of the jerks and appropriate behavior, there's an ambiguity there for the person, right? And so when you're dealing with anxiety, when you're dealing with depression, there's a tendency, a noted tendency, to interpret it as the negative interpretation. If you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with anxiety, and your boss says, hey, can we chat? You are more likely to go, I'm going to get fired, as opposed to, oh, maybe she just wants to talk about that project, right? So policies reduce ambiguity, which reduce stress, right? And it's something in writing. But words are not enough. Writing is not enough. Take action, right? You have to enforce those policies. And sometimes that means getting rid of the jerks. Now, Tracy's informed me it's not that easy. I work for myself, so, I mean, the only jerk I have is my dog, Tyson. He's a Chihuahua, so he growls at everyone. So, you know, sometimes you may instead have to send the jerk to sensitivity training or write up a PIP or note something in their file, but still do something and train employees on these issues, right? Make sure that they have those resources available. And again, there's plenty of different resources that you can provide for the employees. So one of the things I didn't realize is that you can do anonymous screenings, right? So basically, again, if someone thinks that they might have ADHD, they might have depression, they might have anxiety, whatever, there's services available where they can go get checked and it doesn't get like reported back to the boss or something. You know what I'm saying? There's support groups. You could do flex time. You could do mental health days. You as a manager or you as an employer have a large variety of tools available to provide resources to help support your employees as they're dealing with mental health stuff. Let's see. We're close to the halfway mark, so I'll try to be.
That's good.
I'll try to be quick. Oh, yeah. All right. So, prevention in the workplace, related to what we were just talking about. I kid you not, this is going to sound funny, but there were 3 things I thought would get me fired. Who here has heard of LARPing? Okay,
nice.
Most people don't know. Okay, I'll explain to you. The theme is Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's basically Dungeons and Dragons out at a campsite in the woods, and you beat each other with like foam swords or foam maces, and you get dressed up, right? And I kid you not, I thought if they found out, they might fire me, right? Because it's weird. It's weird. The other 2 things I thought would get me fired, diabetes. I'm a diabetic, and I'm very expensive to keep around. My husband yells at me when I say that because I get all mopey, and he's like, net on net, we're making profit, right? So he's very attached to me. He would like me to stick around. But again, like, unfortunately, I don't know how it is here, but in the United States, a lot of health insurance is tied to your employer. And so I am very expensive to my employer. For me personally, I pay $800 a month so that me and my husband can have a health insurance plan, and that still has co-pays and all these types of things. So I am very expensive, but he's very attached to me and says I'm not allowed to say that. So, but the third thing was depression, right? This was a picture I took in college of what depression felt like, right? Because I had all these irrational thoughts that I was a terrible person or what have you. So what could my employee have done so that I wasn't afraid of this? Well, they could have realized that I'm clearly a nerd and that I would love LARP and say something about it, right? But joking aside, having some awareness helps, because then you can be on the lookout for these issues. Saying things helps. I cannot remember a single time my previous employer uttered the words mental health, ever. Like, I didn't know that our health insurance policy had any resources available. I did not know that therapy would be covered. I thought I would have to pay $150 every visit out of pocket to go see a therapist, right? And instead it was $20. Never did I see anyone modeling the behavior, right? And again, actions speak louder than words. You said you're at a place where they do like a red, yellow, green kind of thing?
Yeah, when we do our stand-up meetings at work, we have 2 a week. My boss is big on mental health. It's one of the reasons he hired me, because he likes my mental health talk. But he has us put in our chat window, because we're all remote, that whether we're doing red, green, or yellow, not the right order, and it could be about work or it could be personal. And then, we're allowed to say why if we want to, or not participate at all if we don't want to. And we're pretty open about what's going on, and he participates, and it opens up the discussion about mental health in our workplace, and it's something really simple that you can do, and it starts the discussion, and it can slowly implement it into your team if you're willing to start that discussion right there. And he just got it out of a book he read. Yeah. Because I asked him where he got it from,
Yeah, it's specific enough to be useful, but vague enough to respect people's privacy. And if your boss is willing to be like, hey guys, hey folks, I'm a red today. Like, my dog is sick,
well,
so I'm not.
I'm going through a divorce, is what he said. So.
Yeah, okay. Tracy's a little depressing sometimes. Yeah. So, like, if your boss is willing to do that, then maybe you'll be like, okay, well, you're willing to talk about a divorce, so I'll talk about the fact that I, like, slept poorly last night, right? Yeah, but then the last thing is, you have to act it out. So it's one thing to model it, but again, you want policies, and you want to enforce them, right? Actions speak louder than words, always. So in terms of seeing it and saying it, again, just have an awareness of what kind of signs there might be. Develop a comfort with being and say, hey, how are you doing? And finding ways to get at that while respecting the person's privacy. I don't know how it is here. I would, based on stereotypes, I expect this might be the case over in England as well. No, I know we're in Wales. Calm down, please. No one hurt me. In the United States, you go to like a cashier, and they'll be like, how are you doing? And you'll say, oh, great. How are you? And they'll say, oh, fine. And everyone's lying, right? And a lot of times I'll be like, how are you actually doing, right? So you have to find a way to get past the pleasantries while respecting the person's privacy. And again, communicate this stuff. Don't assume that they know. Don't assume that they know the policies. Don't assume that they know the benefits. Don't assume that they know the culture. Because unfortunately, a lot of these cultures are rare. I mean, you've had a much more storied career than I have. How many teams have you? I've only worked at like 2 places. I'm sorry.
It's just because I've worked in like 5 places in the last few years.
Yeah.
Come on, quit ratting me out.
How many? I didn't say over what duration. How many teams have you worked on where like mental health was open and positive and all this kind of stuff? Like, I mean.
One. Current team.
Current team. Okay. Sample size of N of 5 or whatever, or N of 2, but I think it's safe to say that this is rare. So even baby steps can be really helpful here. And again, model it. So I was really tempted to pull a picture, and I didn't, but as you're probably all aware, Twitter's going through a bit of a management crisis right now. And there was a woman who was, I think she was one of the directors or engineer manager or something like that, but she was high up, and she was posting on Twitter her in a sleeping bag with like a nightcap or whatever, sleeping on the floor at work. Now think about this. Your boss posts that on Twitter. Are you going to ask them, oh, hey, can I take some time off? I'm having a mental health issue. No, right? You're going to try and find a different job, and then if it's the US, you're probably stuck there because you're on a visa, an H-1B visa, right? Like, whatever. So you have to walk the walk as a manager or an employer, because people are going to look at what you're doing, and if you never take your own vacation, why are they going to assume that it's okay for them to do that, right? So you have to model it. You have to demonstrate self-care and work-life balance. And self-care, like, I'm a guy, and sorry to all the Germans here, I see at least one. I was raised German, so like, the way that my German grandfather taught me love was he had me pour concrete, okay? He didn't say I love you. He didn't ask me about my feelings. He was like, all right, we're pouring concrete and we're building a shed. That was love, right? And so for me, I always thought self-care was this frou-frou, like, oh, bath bombs and lavender calendar, The things you burn for scent. Anyway, and then when I became self-employed, I'm like, no, if I don't do self-care, my billable rate goes down, right? If I don't sleep, I'm losing money. If I don't take time off, I'm losing money. And so when I realized that, oh, self-care is just basic math at a certain point, that really helped me take better care of myself, because it wasn't like a cultural thing anymore. It was like, if I don't sleep enough, I don't get things done. Not that everything should be about work, but. And then again, act it out. Be able to apologize when you make mistakes, support and enforce your policies, and tolerate ambiguity, tolerate discomfort, because these are difficult conversations to have. Speaking of.
Talking about having conversations.
So. We got 20 minutes.
20 minutes, whew, we gotta go fast. We're only on number 5. But how do you actually have a conversation with an employee? The first thing is, remember, you're gonna be uncomfortable the first time you have this, and probably almost every time you have this until you do it a lot.
Yep.
But that's absolutely okay. It's just, you're gonna get used to it. If you have to, practice it with somebody.
You got 10 minutes.
10 minutes? Jeez. Okay, pro tip, they're nervous too. Now I'm nervous.
Done. Now we're nervous.
If you've ever said any of these things to yourself, like, what if you say something wrong? I'm their boss, I shouldn't be talking about this. They might think I'm their therapist. Don't worry about it, it'll be fine. Things you should ask yourself.
Sorry in advance.
Do you have any personal concerns that you should, go over before you do this about mental health that you should address? Do you feel equipped as a leader to do this? If not, that's where you need to probably take some training so that you know more about mental health. Do you feel comfortable talking about your own mental health? Because if you don't feel comfortable talking about your own mental health, then you probably shouldn't talk to an employee about theirs. Do you feel comfortable talking to your own leadership about your mental health? Because if it's not a culture already built up above you, then it's probably not filtered down to your employee that it's safe to talk to you. And then make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, basically. So before you have the conversation too, make sure that it's okay with HR, what you can say and what you can't do, because there are rules in different countries about what you can and can't do. We got HIPAA in the United States, so you can't ask medical questions and stuff like that. Be prepared with some hotlines and other resources that you can give them, just in case you find out information and they don't have resources already. You want to make sure you guide them in a direction. If you have an EAP program or resources about the insurance at your company, so that they can get help if they need it. Again, to have that mental health training so that you are more prepared with those resources to give them. As far as the conversation goes, I know we all work remote now for the most part, but quiet place, mute your notifications, mute your phone, make sure you're focused on the conversation. Make sure you're actually listening to the person actively, not distracted by your phones and things going on around you. Make sure you're using positive body language. Don't have your arms crossed and, playing with your hair. Somebody was doing that on a call the other day when I was playing with their hair instead of paying attention to stuff. Make sure you ask open-ended questions. If you ask yes/no questions, you're not going to get very much information out of someone. You never do if you ask yes/no questions. So you got to ask something open-ended so that they open up and share. If they give you negative responses and stuff, don't be put off and take that personal. Don't feel like you have to fill in the silence. Pause and let them answer, because again, they're nervous, you're nervous, so you don't have to fill in the space. Give them time to answer. Make sure you do check your understanding of what they're saying, because like I said, they're nervous. They might say something and not quite, be saying it the way they meant to say it. So you might need clarification on what they're actually saying. And reflect back the actual words to make sure that is what they said. Respond with empathetic statements. Avoid saying cliche things like everything will be okay. And anything you've heard someone say and it just blurts right out.
Yeah, if it comes easily, don't say it.
Avoid that.
Because you got it from a movie and it's wrong.
Most important thing, listen. Like I said, we're running short on time, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, touchy subject. Lots of money gets lost to people committing suicide because
It impacts lives and
impacts lives.
And everything.
A lot of people do it, blah. So, but if an employee has that, you were working with on their mental health does do it, remember, don't take it personal. It was their choice. You did the best you could. Be kind to yourself. And remember, your other team members are dealing with this, so you're probably going to have to get some grief counseling in to help everybody deal with this loss so that everybody can cope with it, because now everybody's had a loss on your team.
Do we want to skip this section, just give a book reference? Or?
Yeah, we're probably going to have to skip this section. But at the end of the slide deck, I've got links to actually help an employee create a wellness action plan. So if you have an employee that has a mental health issue, there's links to where a guide for the leader and a guide for the employee to go through creating a wellness action plan, and it guides you through.
There's a process you can follow. You're not winging this.
Yeah, you're not winging it. And it just helps the employee blah, 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 blah. But it basically gives you these things right here, approaches, helps them identify early warning signs for you, and resources, and a time to help you guys review them, sort of like when you do an annual review or quarterly reviews with an employee, you would kind of review this periodically with them and go through it, make sure things apply, and you're applying things and resources for them.
Is it? Oh,
yeah. So sometimes employees have to take leave for mental health issues, and all my managers have always handled that bad. We'll avoid the really bad story about it because that takes time. But one thing you want to do is treat it like it's a physical illness. Don't treat it any differently if you find, because like in the U.S. they don't have to tell managers to do that, but I've always told my managers because I haven't been shy about it. But don't treat it any different. Don't treat it shy. Talk to the employee like you would any other time. Agree on times you would talk to them. My manager always ghosted me every time I've been on mental health leave. When I had knee surgery, they talked to me all the time and asked me how I was doing. When I was in mental health leave, they're like,
yeah, leper.
So I'm like, same managers sometimes, because I was on leave with mental health one time with the same manager when I had my knee surgery, and reassure them that they can contact you with any concerns. So. Respect their confidentiality. I had a manager one time that told all my coworkers why I was out, and I wasn't out to my coworkers at that job.
Right.
And it came back in my review later that my coworkers decided I was out because
seeking attention.
I was seeking attention because one of my coworkers had been sent to a conference. So evidently I decided to go mental health.
I'm going to go have a psychiatric breakdown.
He went to Summit, so I decided I wanted to be out of work on mental health leave. Yeah, my psychiatrist must agree to that. I wanted to lose a week worth of pay while I was a single parent too, evidently. So yeah, that happens evidently. If you would normally send flowers or a card or something like that to someone that was on physical leave, why not do the same thing when they're on mental health leave? Show them that you care. And be encouraging them to get rest and stay off the email and work, and don't page them and don't call them, and get them to do work like you would do when they're on physical leave.
That's me.
There's
a blue slide, so you know it's me. All right. I think the rest of it's mostly me, right? All right.
I think so.
So talking when they come back. Here's the key thing. How would you handle a different type of absence, right? I think we're like, oh, this is awkward. Again, I was raised German. We did not talk about mental health at all on that side. On my mom's side, it was slightly better, right? On my dad's side, no. But like, you know how to handle this. If someone has a work injury, you're like, no one's ever broken a foot before. What do I do, right? No, there's a way to talk to HR. You might be talking to workers' comp. Like, you know how to do this. You're not like, no one's ever gotten pregnant before. What do we do? I don't know how to handle this. It's like, we have these types of leave that happen, and so you shouldn't treat it dramatically different. Again, some added sensitivity to the context is valuable, but don't overthink this. You can do this, right? Meet with them, focus on what they can do, but acknowledge the limitations, right? If someone has back surgery, maybe they need to take breaks, right? Same thing with this. You may have to make accommodations, which we'll talk about very briefly. But, make sure that you understand, okay, what might be an issue coming back to work. Make sure they feel comfortable with what the process is going to look like. And if you don't have the answers, get the answers. And again, there's a getting back up to speed process. Just like if someone was on parental leave, right? Well, if you're out for 3 months or however long you have parental leave here, like, stuff has changed. Maybe someone was filling in. Like, you have to get them back up to speed. And so, reassure them, like, hey, we don't expect that you're going to, like, day one back to normal. And just make them feel welcome. But in addition to that, make some reasonable accommodations. So I'll be quick, but the short version is find easy wins and get creative, right? Small stuff can go a long way, and it may not cost you anything at all, right? So these could be in the physical environment, the work routine, the workload. Oftentimes, these don't cost you anything except for a little bit of effort, right? Maybe some people think they're like special treatment or something like that, but you can explain the situation. But you can have modified schedule, allow for breaks, a support animal, a private space, all this kind of stuff costs you nothing. If they're still doing the work, it costs you $0, and it's not that hard to implement. And be aware of the things that might exacerbate the situation with the work environment or something like that. We got 1 minute left. I know. Wrapping up, go easy on yourself, right? You can't please everyone. And the thing is, with mental health, you cannot take responsibility for a person's mental health. You can only control what you can control, and that's the work environment and your actions. They might be fighting a battle from a previous thing, and you have no control over that. But look around in your place, and is this the kind of thing that promotes mental health, or does it promote gossip and bickering and harassment and bullying, right? Have a plan for what you can do and do what you can do. And real quick, some slides for resources. We'll have this up somewhere, but you can also...
Yeah, worst case scenario, I can put it up on my website or the GitHub.
But we got like 4 slides of resources.
Yeah, 4 slides of resources. The wellness action plan's on the 3rd slide, the second and top one. Job accommodations website. I've got a website where I've got a whole bunch of links to stuff I've read up on and presentations that the community's done. A couple of books that I've read up on, and I think there's a link to like a whole bunch of books as well.
This is us. Who cares about that?
Contact info, you can find that somewhere else.
We can talk in the community zone for questions.
Feedback.
Thank you.
We did it.